free to have a seat. I've got a couple of photos up here that I want to show you. I'm not going to make any comment on. I'm hoping that you will be able to find a place in your life at some point in your life. Maybe you were going through something that you can relate to these pictures. Maybe you can't relate to them. Maybe it's something that you saw somebody else going through or whatever else. But I'm just going to put them up. I'm not going to say a word. I just want to put them up, and I want to see if maybe they draw anything out of you at all. And again, like I said, it may not be something fresh. Just think about, have I ever had a moment where I just felt like this was me? I'll show you two pictures here. I think all of us, and even those of us who don't like to deal with life and struggles and whatever else, all of us at some point, and some more than others, but all of us know what it's like to feel the weight of the world and feel down. We know what it's like to feel overwhelmed. We know what it's like to feel anxious about stuff, or even angry or confused or even depressed. And many of us don't like talking about it at all. We just don't even talk about it. Some of you right now went, oh man, you don't talk about this. Like this is not what I want to talk about right now. I get it, because talking about emotions and dealing with emotions for some of us is not our strong suit. And let me be the first to say that when I saw things like this in my life, and I experienced things like this in my life, or I saw it in others, I grew up in a time and place, maybe like you, maybe not like you. I'll be 55 this year. Thank God I get my senior citizens discount at McDonald's. Looking forward to getting that 10% on my Big Mac. So, but that being said, I grew up in a time and a place where you were told that you just needed to stuff your emotions. If you were crying, you just needed to stop it. It was nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody wanted to hear you complain. Nobody wanted to hear your emotions. It was just, no, done. And couple that with growing up in a church where nobody knew what to deal with emotions. I mean, I can tell you this for a fact. I have never heard a sermon in my life. I'm not saying there's not some out there. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying personally, I've never sat in a church, been in a church where any pastor talked about emotions at all. And so you throw together sort of a, growing up a certain way, growing up hearing a theology or teaching that, if you had emotions, or you were depressed, or you were anxious, or you had stuff going on in your life, Jesus came to get rid of that. And if you still got it, something must be wrong with you. And that was the way it was sort of said. So I grew up, whenever I would get around something like this, or whenever I would see this, or whenever I felt this way, or ever I saw it, two words came to mind very quickly: fix it. It just needs to be fixed. Now, I'm sure at some level there was some nobility to that, in the fact that, we don't want to see anybody suffer. We don't want to see people go through hard times. I get that. But emotions aren't really there to be fixed. They're there to be felt. And so oftentimes it was like, that's the way I grew up. That was who I was. And maybe you can relate to that. Maybe you can't relate to that. But I knew that life had its ups and downs. I knew that. And you know that. We all know that. But for me, the way I grew up, the society in which I grew up in, the theological system that I grew up, the goal for me, for most of my life, was to live between here and here. Because I didn't know what to do with this. Nobody else knew what to do with this. There was a lot of people experiencing this, but they were sort of just pushed to the side. Like, they must not be the ones that are really living right. They must not be the ones that get it right. Because if you're living for God and you're really walking in all the victory of God, you should be a person of peace. You shouldn't have any anxiety. Cast all of your anxiety on Him and just get it all out of there and be gone. And we should just live and truck on and whatever else. And I knew at some level that couldn't be the case. But I didn't know what to do with that. And maybe you don't either. I want to talk about it, and you're in a good place, because we're in a series called Emotional Regulation, and we're talking about how to deal with how we feel, and we're not great at it, and churches need to get better at it, because people hurt, and they have pains, and oftentimes the last place they want to share any of that is church, because they just know that people are going to look down at them, they're going to think that they're not spiritual enough. They're gonna, a number of things. And some of you all are in the shadows, probably going through all kinds of stuff, and you're just like, I don't know who I could tell, I don't know who I could trust. I get that. But it's incumbent upon us to decide what kind of church that we want to have and how we want to do this thing. Because we need to be authentic, and we need to be real. So I want to tell you a story this weekend out of the Bible that I'm going to set up. And those of you all who know the story well will go, that was a very short setup, and it is. There's a lot more could be said. But I'm setting it up in case somebody doesn't know the story. I also want to say that I would not have been able to have processed the text the way the text is written for most of my life, because I would have missed some of the subtleties that are not subtle. They're straightforward, but I wouldn't have caught them because they deal with emotion. I just wouldn't have seen them. I would have just gone on and not seen it. But I need to set up the story. And many of you all know this story. If you don't, let me give you a little bit of background. But it's called the story of Joseph. And the story of Joseph is a large part of the first book of the Bible, Genesis. And when you have something that's got a large amount of material, it's important because the writers have chosen what they're putting in. And this is a big story here in Scripture. To give you just a little bit of background, Joseph had two dreams. They didn't happen all at once, but this picture does both of them. One dream he had was that him and his brothers, 11 of them, and he was the 12th, were out gathering grain in sheaves, and that all the sheaves bowed down to his that stood upright. And then he had another dream where the sun, moon, and 11 stars all bowed to him. And he shared that dream. He shared both those dreams. And it didn't go over very well in his life. We'll talk about that in a second, but I want you to just press a pause button for a second. Just pause. This is totally separate from the message, but I really felt like when I was putting the message together, I needed to stop and say this. Listen to me. If God has put a dream in your heart, and it's from God, not a bad burrito, okay? If it's God, and he put a dream in your heart or a call in your life, or he said he's gonna do something in your life, and that's what he says he's gonna do, I want you to hear this. No man, no church, no family member, no leader, no government, no giant, nobody can keep what God has said he's going to do in your life from happening if he in fact has said he's going to do this in your life. Nothing at all, zero. And I say that because what happens, and I see it a lot as a pastor, I see people who feel like God has given them a dream, and it may be. God's given them a call, it may be. It may very well be that he has. But when you say to them, well, okay, well, let's see how this works, and let's see how this, oh, no. God's called me, it's right now, like I'm ready to go. And it's like, well, hold on for a second. And this is what I want you to hear. Many times in our lives when we feel like God's given us a call or he's given us a destiny, we want to be discovered more than we want to be developed. I want you to hear this. See, what happens is if God's really giving you a dream, God's really giving you a calling, I'm going to tell you how it's going to work. It's going to go from bad to worse, and there's going to be suffering and hardship and all kinds of problems before you get to where you need to get to. You go, why does that happen? What happens because God's building character in you to get you to the place when you finally get there that you can handle it. See, I tell staff often, our talent can take us places that our character can't keep us. God's in the character business. He's not in the platform business. And so if God's called you to something, I just want you to hear, you don't have to rush it and push it and cram it. Trust God and trust the process, because there is nobody that can keep you from doing whatever it is God's called you to do. And just so that you know, the reason David knew he could go fight Goliath, he knew it. He knew he could go fight Goliath because he wasn't gonna die. You say, how do you know, Chip, he wasn't gonna die? Because God told him he was gonna be king and he wasn't king yet. If God tells you you're gonna be king, you're gonna be king. And it don't make a difference what goes on in your life, what giant comes in your life. God's gonna do what God's gonna do, because it ain't you ain't the one that's doing it. It's God's the one that's calling you. God's the one that gave you the dream, and God's the one that's going to accomplish it. We don't have to push it, okay? So that being said, that's just a side. That's for somebody. I really believe somebody needs to hear that, because you know how it works. People get around here, they'll be, oh, I'm called of God. I'm like, okay, great. When do I get to take it all over. Well, not yet. I mean, just work a little bit, whatever. Well, I'm going to go to another church that sees the calling of God. And I'm like, well, okay, well, that ain't the way it works, but have fun. Anyway, because that's just the way, we just want to get to where we want to get. It takes a while. Joseph didn't get to where he got overnight. And so he tells his brothers his dream. That doesn't go well. They don't like it. So they sell him to the Egyptians into slavery. He ends up in Potiphar's house. Potiphar's wife makes an advance on him. He runs. She lies about it. He ends up in jail. Later on, he ends up at the right hand of Pharaoh, most important figure in Egypt outside of Pharaoh with all the power. I know it's a very short, condensed story, but that's what happened. And so what's interesting is that when he's at the right hand of Pharaoh and he has all the power, he probably could have said to himself, hey, that dream God gave me, I could go get my brothers now and show them that what God said. He doesn't do that. The text implies that he's really got faith that God will bring it about when God's going to bring it about. So a famine arises, and when the famine arises, it brings people from all over to Egypt. And some of the people that come are his brothers. He recognizes his brothers, but they don't know it's Joseph. They think he's a mysterious Egyptian person. And for 2 chapters, you can go home and read this, chapter 43 and chapter 44 of Genesis. He sort of interrogates them, does some things to see where they're at. He's ultimately trying to see, have they changed and have they learned to love? And as that process is going on, the emotions get to Joseph. And we pick up in chapter 45 where he reveals to his brothers who he is. And I just want you to see what the text says. It's not by accident. It's not just throwaway words. God intended for these words to be there for a reason. Here's what it says. Then Joseph could not control himself. His emotions, he's overwhelmed, like many of us, just overwhelmed. And there's a number, it's a buffet of emotions. I mean, one of them is obviously gonna be joy because God's done what God said. I mean, it's like now live in person after all these years, the dream that God gave to Joseph, it's right here. But it's also the trauma and the history and the years that have gone by. I mean, he's just being pelted in his life with all these emotions. He's got all this stuff to the point of where he can't control himself. I don't know if you've ever been there before. I don't know if you've ever had emotion hit you so much that you just started crying. You don't know why you did. You just did. You don't know why you felt the way that you felt, but it was sort of coming out all over you. And maybe you've never felt that way, or maybe you've suppressed it, or maybe you've learned to shove it down. But you've seen them. You've seen people like that. I mean, you could probably go out on any Friday or Saturday right out here on the interstate with us and travel along, and you find somebody that wants to hang out of a car who is not being able to control themselves because they're mad. They usually have like a Grace bumper sticker on the back of the car too, and yelling or whatever. Or kids. We've seen kids like at Target. Right? Your kids, I'm joking. That's I'm better than my kids. My kids do it too. You roll around on the ground. They didn't get the Buzz Lightyear or whatever it was that they wanted, and they're out of control and it's embarrassing and you all feel that way. And then if you're younger, you go, my kids will never do that. They will. I'll never leave a restaurant like that with food on the floor. You will. And so the deal is they're going, but we all know that we know what it's like. Whether we've experienced it or seen it, when somebody cannot, it's like the emotions are so overwhelming. And it's even doubly more because this is before all the people that are with him. It's a breakdown. Just a breakdown. So this is heavy. I want you to see. I mean, all this is going on. He knows those are his brothers. They don't know this is Joseph. It's emotional. There's drama. It's dripping with stuff. And so let's look here. And he says, he cried, make everyone go out from me. He wants to get rid of all the Egyptians, all the people that are part of Egypt. He just wants it to be him and his brothers. He wants everybody gone. And then the writer tells us this little snippet. No one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And this is the moment where it's like, ooh, what's gonna happen? He's got all the power. They did him wrong. Is he gonna get him back? What's he gonna do? It's written that way so that you and me, when we read it, we go, ooh, I wonder what I would do. I wonder how I would act. See, Scripture's a mirror. I've said this for years if you've come here. Let Scripture read you. Don't go to work and quote Bible bullets at your friend. That's gonna push them away. Read the Bible so much that it changes you so that your friend asks you what's different about you, okay? And so we read this, what's he gonna do? What would I do? I mean, in today's world, it's like just get everybody back, right? I mean, it just seems like it's the normal thing. It's almost like a Christian virtue now. We cheer when people get each other back, which is crazy because it's not even close to being biblical. It's like we tossed that out a while back. Who cares about the Bible? Except the parts that we care about, you know? Like the other side. But that shouldn't be the way that it is. How's he gonna react? What's he gonna do? How's he gonna respond? He wept aloud. Whoa, can you imagine? So his brothers are there, he's cleaned everybody out, and he starts crying. Like, not a little cry, a heaving cry, because the Egyptians heard it and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Can you imagine if you're his brothers, like, whoa, man, I don't know. Now, growing up, when I was growing up, and I'm not saying it's right, I'm just telling you how it was, seeing a grown man cry, it was like everybody was like, they would say, you just didn't do it. Like men didn't cry. He's crying, he's weeping. Everybody can hear it. This is a real moment. And he says to his brothers, I am Joseph. Whoa. I'm sure they were like, they don't even know what to think. This is an Egyptian leader. Like they're not even thinking, I'm Joseph. And Joseph says, I hope my father's alive. They told him his father was alive in the preceding chapters. He's emotional. He can't control himself. He's weeping. He's thinking about everything. I hope dad's alive. He knows he's alive, but I hope dad's good. He's emoting. And then it says his brothers could not even answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. They felt it. They felt the guilt. And you know what they were thinking. What's he gonna do to us? What's he gonna do? Man, we should have listened to his dream. He was right. What's he gonna do? Because you know what they're thinking. He's gonna get them back. Joseph said to his brothers, come near. He breaks the protocol of Egypt and non-Egyptian people. He says, come near me. They came near and he said, I'm your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Doesn't shove that under the rug. He's letting his emotions show. He's saying the words of what have hurt him in his life. And then the text gives us this really interesting next verse where he says, don't be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. God sent me before you to preserve life. It's really interesting. This is an interesting passage because you've got the emotions are there. The hurt is there. They're not diminished. They're not said they're bad, anything. And then you've got this snippet over here that God is sovereign. And it's like, wow. So let's look at this together. Let's see if we can maybe make some sense out of this. Well, first of all, what I can tell you for sure is our emotions are real and they are valid. Now, if you would have asked me many years ago, are emotions real and valid? I would have always said yes. I would have never said no. But I don't think I would have really meant the yes that I was giving. I think the yes would have been with an asterisk to it. That yeah, they're real and they're valid. I mean, you feel them. But we got to move on. We got to get out of this situation, man. We got to move from here because I was uncomfortable with it, didn't know how to process it. But the reality is emotions are real and they're valid. We're told he couldn't control himself. We're told that he wept aloud. And nowhere are we told that this man was anything other than a wonderful follower of God. So what we have here in the text is this, and I think some people need to hear this. You need to hear this. This doesn't mean that you get to elbow somebody that you think needs to hear this. This is for us as people. This is not to point to somebody else and say, see. No, But I want you to see this because emotions are real and they're valid. This weeping aloud, this feeling overwhelmed that he feels, I want you to hear this because somebody needs to hear this. This isn't a sign of weakness. This is a sign of humanity. You're not weak because you have emotions. Granted, we don't want to be absolutely controlled by our emotions, but our emotions are valid. They tell us things. They're promptings. They're gonna come out one way or the other. It's just the way it works. And what we've got to do as a church, and we got to decide this as people and as a church, is we got to learn how to create space for emotions to be shared rather than just simply being dismissed. That's great. I hear that you got that. I hear that you got anxiety. You should give your anxiety to the Lord. He'll cure it, man. He's a God of peace. See ya. I'm going to go get something to eat over here at UTC Mall. No, that's not, we can't. There's people hurting. You got emotions. And some of you all, you think like, oh, we don't need to share these things. We just need to move on. See, if you had some real friends that you could talk to, that they would tell you, no, you got emotions too. It's just you ain't dealt with them very well, and they come out sideways. Like on the pickleball court, when you slam the racket on the ground, yeah, that's something that probably happened 20 years ago with you and your dad you just ain't talked about or shared. That you need to be dealing with. It's coming out sideways, man. But see, we don't have to talk about it. We need to do. And I grew up in a church. They didn't say it. They didn't quote it this way. But this is the way Romans 12:15 felt. This is the way the church I grew up in is rejoice with those who rejoice and tell those who weep to stop it. It's the church I grew up in. It's not what it says. It says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And some of you are going to go, yeah, well, that's not me. No, you don't get a choice that's not you. This is what all Christians everywhere are called to be, is people that empathize with the body. Because if you can't do it and I can't do it, then somebody else isn't going to get healed. We've got to be a place that says, I will meet you in whatever emotion you're in, and I can be there for you, and I can love you. I'm telling you, if the church of the Lord Jesus Christ could learn how to work with each other, with our emotions, we would have so much healing that went on in the people of God. I'm telling you, that's the way it is, okay? And listen, when you can't do this and you can't weep and you can't rejoice, this is just absolutely true, and we need to hear this. Is trying to operate too quickly on a broken heart is just as counterproductive as trying to walk on broken legs. So what do? We're overwhelmed with emotions. I'm not an expert. If you walk out of here and go, man, our pastor's an expert. Wrong. I'm giving you the best information that I can find. Talk to some other people, and this is not just me. This is people that I've learned. But I don't want you to be overwhelmed, because when you're overwhelmed, it brings us to paralysis. That's why he weeps. That's why he shares what's going on. This is how to move forward. But when we're handling these big emotions and whatever, this is just some stuff that I've read and studied, and stuff that's really true. And it's science is basically telling us. The people that study the body and study the brain, it's really cool stuff. Some of you probably know this, but if you don't, this is really good stuff to know. To sit straight up, you're going through, you're just emotional overload. Sit straight up, push back your shoulders, breathe deep. And some of you all already know how to breathe because your Apple Watch tells you to breathe on a regular basis, okay? Pause, exhale. If you do this 5 times for 5 seconds, in other words, you shoulders back, breathe deep, exhale. You do that 5 times, 5 seconds each time. This is crazy, but this is true. Look at this. It sends a signal to our brain that we can't possibly be in danger. Because if we were in peril, our breathing would be fast and shallow. It's like, it's rewired. Like when you're overwhelmed, just taking that breath and whatever, it starts to tell your brain, okay, it can't be terrible, and it helps your brain regulate, helps you emotionally regulate. Another thing that you can do is to move our body. When we take a walk or exercise or do something, that really helps. This one's really interesting, to cool down. Like to literally, if you get into a colder shower. Now I know listen to me. I know some of you are gonna go home and you're gonna look at your spouse and go, you know what you need? You need a cold shower. That's not what I'm asking you to do. You're not helping anybody by doing that. It was funny, I had a couple out here and the lady said to me after, I think it was the 8:30 service, she goes, thank you so much for talking about this. This is so good. And the husband goes, you just need to go home and take a cold shower. You know, he was joking, he was smiling. But this is not for you. But this is really neat to cool down the cold shower. But also you can put cold water or ice cubes on your wrist and it actually helps to bring some things down. Or I can tell you as a pastor, this is true. Just be super honest in a prayer-filled rant to God. And you say, oh, Chip, I couldn't rant to God. I mean, nobody could rant to God. Yeah, there's about 100 Psalms that are nothing more than a rant. I mean, they're a rant. Why'd you do this? Where are you at? How come you let this happen? Why are enemies winning? Are you up there? They're in here. That's why people like reading the Psalms, because they're like, yeah, that's my life. They're here. I can relate to that. Let me tell you something as your pastor. God's not concerned with you bringing all of your emotions and your concerns and your hurts to him. He's bothered when you don't bring them to him. So we gotta be honest. Emotions are real and valid. But we also gotta learn to acknowledge the hurt and the pain. The emotions are telling you something. They're telling you about the hurt and the pain that you have on the inside. You got to be able to name that. That's why he says, you sold me into Egypt. He's able to put the feeling with a name of what's happened, not hiding it. Joseph needed to express his emotions. He didn't need to sweep them under the rug. And some of you may live in situations where everything gets swept under the rug. It doesn't work. And if you're one who likes to sweep under the rug, it doesn't work. You're not helping you, you're not helping your family, you're not helping anybody if we just sweep stuff under the rug. We gotta be able to learn how to validate, name, and experience our emotions and be able to share them. That this is what it is. I'm feeling something, it's valid, and it's really coming from here, and that takes some time. And oftentimes we don't have time. We just wanna say a prayer and push people down the road. I want you to come out from the shadows. I want you to not live that way. God. I don't think God wants you to live sweeping everything under the rug, stuffing everything down. And so that's there. But then there's this third part of this passage that we need to hear. We got to cling to the sovereignty of God. And he does this. I mean, he says, God sent me. And that little bit of information has changed some of the way he's processed through this. Doesn't mean he didn't process his emotions. They were real and valid. Doesn't mean he didn't name it. He did. But he also understood the sovereignty of God. I want you to hear me here. I want you to lean in here. And I put this up here. I could have just said it, but I also made it up here on the screen so that you could read it as I say it, because I want you to hear this. I cannot, as your pastor, make everything that happens to you in our world make sense. I can't. If you're looking for me to be able to do that, let me go ahead and lightly let you down. I can't. There's things that happen to people that are so evil, so heinous, so terrible that I don't even know what to say. All I can do is just sit there. It's heinous. I can't make those things make sense. It's impossible. Now we can validate them. We can talk about them. But as a pastor, when it comes to the sovereignty of God, I can't make it make sense to you. I can only point you to the goodness of God, and I can only show you passages that we take in faith, that we see in Scripture that God was at work, and we see how he put things together. That's all I can do. And I can say at some level, Joseph had to have been able to process. It didn't make sense completely, but he was able to process, because what we find here is he wasn't holding a grudge. And for many of us, we hold a grudge. And I just want to say this in love, so you hear this. To hold a grudge is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. It's not productive. And sometimes it's that understanding a little bit about God that maybe just helps a little bit to deal. Doesn't mean we don't validate, doesn't mean that we don't talk about it, but it gives us, and I want you to hear this. I can't, folks, I can't make you believe like I believe. I can't even ask you to believe like I believe. I can only tell you as your pastor what I believe with all of my heart. I believe this with all of my heart, and it only applies to believers. It does not apply to non-believers. I believe Scripture says that God somehow, in a way that is beyond us, is working things, is doing things in a way that we're unaware of. Like he told Job, if I told you what I was doing, you wouldn't understand it. I don't believe any of us in this lifetime can make sense of some of the things that have happened to us. I can only tell you what I believe. I can only share to you what I really believe about future and what I believe about God. And one of those is this passage that I want to read to you that John wrote, that's your future. It is your future as a child of God. It says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. The sea in the Bible, the sea in the Genesis is the briny sea. There's no life. God has to divide the sea, create the land, put life on, and the sea's all this chaos. And in the book of Revelation, the beasts come up out of the sea, that one day the sea will be no more. All the chaos of life will be no more. All the anxieties and overwhelming, all that will be no more. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. This is what I want you to hear. You may not see it the way I see it. You may not believe it the way I believe it. It's fine. I just want to tell you what I believe. And I believe this with all my heart. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. How can he do that? I mean, it's possible. I mean, I've never been to heaven. It's possible that in heaven we just don't have tear ducts. And that's maybe the answer. I don't think that's the answer. I really don't. I think the answer, and I believe this, is that somehow, some way, when we stand before God and we're able to truly see, this is faith. This is faith speaking. This is not logic. This is not me being able to tell you that here's the way it is. This is not me making sense out of it. This is what I believe with all of my heart. I believe one day when I stand before God, all the things that happen to me and to other people, all the stuff, somehow, some way, and I don't know how it's going to happen, is that when you stand there and God's able to download and we see and we have a larger perspective and we see how other things were going on in other people's lives and what God was doing and how he was just sort of working in orchestrating, that somehow, some way, that the sufferings of this present time are not going to be worthy to be compared to the glory that's going to be revealed, that in some way, some form, that all the things that have been so wrong in our life, we're going to see a different vantage point, and all those tears are going to go away when we stand in front of the goodness and awesomeness of God, of who he is. That's what I believe. I mean, and you can say, I don't believe that. I don't agree with you. That's fine. You don't have to. You do not have to. I'm just telling you what I believe. And I believe that death's going to be no more, neither shall there be no more mourning, and there's no more crying. I don't know how, if we didn't have tear ducts, we could say there's going to be no more crying. I think there's going to be no more crying because there's not going to be any other things that do what they've done to us or pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And then we're told here that he was seated on the throne and said, behold, I'm making all things new. He's making all things new. I believe with all of my heart that one day God is going to be even better and more gooder and more awesome. And I'm going to be able to see things in a certain way where I'm going to just be able to say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. How awesome is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. I just believe Friday may be there. I may see Friday. I may experience Friday. But I believe that one day Sunday is coming that makes sense out of Friday in a way that Jesus' death and that horror and all of that stuff makes sense in light of Sunday. I just believe one day in our lives, God's going to, the sufferings of this time are not going to be worthy to be compared with the glory that's going to be revealed. I believe that with all of my heart. And I want you to cling to that, because it doesn't always make sense, but I believe in clinging to that allows us to process things a little bit. Doesn't mean we don't validate, doesn't mean whatever. So that being said, I got one last thing that I want to say, and I get you out of here. I know you want to leave. I really hope you stay for the last song. It's the last song. We'll really put this together. It will really speak to you. But I got one thing I want to say to somebody, and I think it's maybe just to a person. Maybe it's more than that. But I just really felt like I needed to close with this. I know that there's hurt. I know that there's pain. We got to validate those things. We got to talk about them. And I believe that with all of my heart. But I also want you to know that as a pastor, I do believe, not negating these and dismissing these things, all those 100% here. I also believe that God is still a miracle working God. And I do believe that God still has the power to change lives and to do things in this world that are above anything that we could ever think. I believe God does miracles still today. I believe he's in the miracle working business. And if this is for one person, I just want you to hear this. I just want you to hear. Maybe, just maybe, this will elicit some faith from you where you go, oh my goodness, man, what if God? So Paul is shipwrecked on the island of Malta in Acts 28. And normally when the ship was sinking, they would have just thrown all the prisoners overboard with weights and drowned them because they were prisoners. But they didn't. The centurion liked Paul, and they took him to the island. When they got to the island, it was cold, it was damp. They were trying to build a fire, and as Paul gets some brush to put in the fire, the heat brought out a serpent, and it bit Paul in the hand. Paul takes the serpent, and he throws it back into the fire. Everybody around is like, he's dead. He's dead. He's guilty. Fate has caught him. But he doesn't die at all. And we're told that 3 days later, as he goes to the house of a dignitary, we see this. I want to read you the passage here in Acts. We see that it happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery. Paul visited him and prayed. And putting his hands on him, he healed him. I just want you to hear this. See, that hand had been bitten by a viper, it had been wounded. But that same hand, just 3 days later, was healing somebody else. I just want you to hear me. Sometimes the woundings that we get in our lives, because of God and because of how good he is, actually become the things that God uses to heal other people in our lives. That he uses some of these things that were so hard for us in his glory. Through his power, he uses that to minister to other people. And that may not be you, but it may be. And I just want you to know that God is still in the miracle working business. You come out of the shadows, get your hurt out, talk to somebody, share it, get it validated, name it for what it is, but you just never know. It might be that snake bite on your hand that becomes the healing for somebody else, because I believe God is still in the healing business and he can do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ever ask or think.